Let it burn. Until the early 1970s, Yellowstone's park managers extinguished all the flames in the park because fire suppression was believed to protect both the animals and the wildlife. But they began to realize that these fires were a natural part of the landscape and shouldn't be suppressed. Managers launched a natural fire program in 1972, and the fires caused by lightning were no longer put out. For more than a decade, the fires were small and went out by themselves and mostly burned old trees. But in 1988, that changed. Here are some images of the fires that burned Yellowstone in the summer of 1988. It was a very hot and dry summer. They burned 683,000 of the park's 2.2 million acres, and about 1.2 million acres total within the greater Yellowstone area, which included several national forests adjoining the park, as well as Grand Teton National Park. Now, you would expect me to say that as a result of that much devastation, they closed the park and it's no longer open to the public. But that would be wrong. Here are some recent pictures of Yellowstone. There's some recent, there we go. Those are the recent pictures of Yellowstone. You can see the greenery in the background. You see the greenery there. And in the next slide, along with the bison, you see some greenery. And it's all grown back in Yellowstone. What was the key to the recovery? The key to the recovery is a pine cone. Show the pine cone again. That pine cone right there, that is the pine cone from the lodgepole pine. And notice it's closed. The seeds can't come out of that pine cone until the temperature is between 113 and 122 degrees Fahrenheit. There is a resin on that pine cone that seals it, and the only way that it opens up is when it gets really hot, like in a fire. It's the only time it comes out. Without fire, these seeds would never be released. And so that's the pine cone after the fire. You notice how it looks like a completely different pine cone, all opened up. And the seeds came out, and the seeds would go down into the soil. And you'd think, well, isn't the soil damaged because of the fire? No, just a few centimeters is damaged because of the fire. And the seeds go down in the fertile soil, and it grows. And so Yellowstone came back. People had said, oh, Yellowstone is completely destroyed. It'll never be what it was before. But they were wrong. Why? Because there is a God who created the pine cone to react to fire. And the God who created that pine cone so those seeds would come down and that forest would recover is the same God who designed you and me. And that same God knows that we can recover too. That we're designed to respond in the same way when we go through something difficult. It doesn't destroy us. In fact, it brings about a new season of growth in our lives. I've experienced that in my life. Things that could have totally destroyed me actually made me stronger. We flinch when we see fire happening in our lives. We flinch when we see difficulties happen in our lives, and we try to run from the scene, but we can't escape because it's a part of us now. Have you ever had this thought? Something happens in your life and you say, I can never recover from this. It's it. We're done. It's over. But then, time and God working in your life, you realize, wait a minute, that actually was a good thing in my life because God used it in a way. God does that in our lives. We think it's over. What does God say about that? In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, starting in verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God, not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We are always carry around in our bodies what? The death of Jesus. Why? So that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body, where there's new growth, where death was in charge. Therefore, verse 16, therefore, we do not lose heart. Why? Because a lot of people at that point would lose heart. But Paul says, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Notice that. Not on what is seen. Everything you see right now, take a look around this room. Everything you see is temporary. This body that I currently have is temporary. I don't know, maybe 25 years, maybe 20, maybe 10 minutes, I don't know. I'm not feeling that good. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. This is temporary. The body, look at your hands. You are temporary. Everything in this room is temporary. That's kind of a morbid thought. So we'll move on to the important stuff. But what is unseen is eternal. What is that? God's presence in our life. Your soul. Everybody take out your soul and take a look at it. You can't do that. Why? It's eternal. That's the eternal part of you that'll keep on going. See, I love that passage, and I tried to emphasize it. There's one word that Paul uses in those first 3 or 4 verses, but. This happened, but. And then this happened, and this happened, and this, but. God draws a line. He's protecting you. It doesn't feel like it. When you're in the midst of a forest fire in your life, it doesn't feel like God is protecting you. But God draws a line this far and no farther. Here's the principle. Keep moving forward. When there's a forest fire in your life, keep moving forward by trusting in what you can't see. Keep moving forward by trusting in what you can't see. You can't see God at work right now. You can't see God. I don't know if you know this. God's already at tomorrow and working on tomorrow so that when you wake up tomorrow, it will be ready for you. Now, it'll be Monday, and it won't feel like it's ready for you. But Monday will be ready for you, and everything will be in place, and God's working in 2052. And in 2075, if we get there. God's working in the future, getting it ready for you. You can't see that, but by faith we believe that and we move forward. And that's a lot to try to understand. So let's take a look at a life where we can see this unfold right in front of us. And so let's go back almost 4,000 years. It was 1,600 years before Jesus in Genesis 37. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flock. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. This was a family, there was one father, and they had 4 mothers. There were 4 wives, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. Aren't those sweet names? I haven't heard any Zilpahs lately. I don't know. Maybe I'm not looking in the right place. But can you imagine a family with 4 mothers? It was filled with rivalry and jealousy between the children of the different mothers. And there was all kinds of dysfunction. And then add to this Joseph, who's a tattletale. Right? Dad, they were doing this. And Joseph's brothers did not like him. And then it got worse. God gave Joseph this dream. And he shared it. Genesis 37:8. His brothers responded, "So you think you're going to be our king, do you? You actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because his dreams and the way he talked about them. God showed in this dream that his parents and his brothers would bow down to him. Everybody would bow down to him, which was a crazy thought. And he shared that dream. And because he shared that, what happened? Hatred, as you can expect. How many of you had younger siblings? How many of you had younger siblings that were going, "Nyeh, nyeh, nyeh, nyeh," you know? And you'd like to take them out behind the woodshed and show them what for, but, Mom would find out or Dad would find out, so you didn't. But you were, one day, I'm going to get them. And that was what was going on in that family. It was rather dysfunctional. So, sometime later, Joseph's father sent him to check on his brothers. Why? Because he knew if they were doing something wrong, Joseph would tell them, "Hey, they were doing this and they were doing that." So he sent Joseph to check on them. Genesis 37:18. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance as he approached. How did they know in the distance? Because his dad bought him this coat. Multicolored coat. And he was so proud of it. And they could see that in the distance. Saw him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. That hatred that they had fermented until they had their chance. Unprocessed emotion ferments. Unprocessed emotion ferments. If we have unprocessed emotion, somebody does something and we don't process it. What do you mean process? There are multiple ways to process emotion. One, you want to know how to process emotion? Go to the book of Psalms. David has some Psalms where he just goes, "God, this guy, I want him dead. I want his children to die. I want his wife to be a widow. He's expressing that emotion to God. One way to process emotion is just simply tell God, "God, this is terrible. It's frustrating. I feel like this." And just vomit all that emotion out and process that emotion. His brothers didn't do that, and so they were filled with all this emotion, and they were going to take it out on their brother and kill him. But in verse 27 of that chapter, instead of hurting him, here's the idea, let's sell him to the Ishmaelite traders. Why? So they can get some money out of him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood, and his brothers agreed. Joseph's half-brother and cousin, they were cousin brothers, Reuben, their mothers were sisters, and so they were both half-brothers and cousins. That's weird, right? And they were closer than the other brothers because they're doubly related, and they're closer than those guys. And so Reuben spoke up for Joseph because they didn't want him to kill him, and he was going to rescue him later, but then he came back and he found out his brothers had sold them to the Ishmaelites. And so what they did, the way they covered it up, is they took the robe, they killed a goat, and they put blood all over the coat, and they gave it to Jacob and said, look what we found. Is this your son? Not our brother. Is this your son's coat? Oh, yeah. And so they made their father believe that his favorite son was dead. Isn't that terrible? So here's, what can we learn? How can we apply this to our lives? First of all, realize you will be attacked. That will not make it on a Hallmark card. Realize you will be attacked. We have a tendency to think, listen, if I serve God, then everything is going to go wonderful in my life, and everything is going to be sweet and beautiful, and I'm going to hear birds chirping all the time. That's not always the case. You will be attacked, especially when you unwisely brag about this wonderful dream God has given you. Joseph could have used a little bit of tact in the way he shared that dream. You will be attacked, but Genesis 39 verses 2 and 3. He was sold to these Ishmaelite traders, and then he was sold to a man named Potiphar in Egypt. Verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This is crazy. Here's a non-believer. And he's looking at Joseph. He bought this slave, got a good deal on him from these Ishmaelite traders. He buys this slave and he starts working, and he sees, wow, hey, I want you to take care of that. I want you to make sure the other servants are fed. I want you to make sure these guys take care of that field. And everything he puts Joseph in charge of goes really, really well. And he's had lots of servants over the years, but none of them were like this guy. And he realizes that God's hand, not that he was really good, but that God's hand was on him. Remember that God is with you. Why do we need to remember that? Because when the forest fire happens in your life, we have a tendency to forget that. We forget that. We feel like, oh, God's a million miles away. And so he tells us over and over again, I'm with you. God is close to the brokenhearted. And it will feel like he's far away, but feelings are not what we base our faith on. Remember that God draws that line this far and no farther. And so Joseph is there in Egypt, and he's doing well, he's succeeding, And then what happens? Well, Potiphar has a wife. And Potiphar's wife is not getting a lot of attention. And she notices this young man. And she starts flirting with Joseph. And then she flat out propositions him and says, "Come sleep with me." And he says no. Notice what he says, verse 8. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held nothing back from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." So, restrain yourself from sinning. See, temptation comes when you're vulnerable. Imagine all the excuses Joseph could have used. Well, God's abandoned me, so I guess it's okay. Or, this is your time. Or, God wants you to be happy, doesn't he? Or, well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Or maybe God is providing a path for your freedom through this affair. Or what kind of excuse could you come up with? Man, you could justify just about everything in that situation, but Joseph said no. Joseph said no to his passion. He said no to his lust. He said no to his desire, and he obeyed God. And we could go right back to the first point. When remember that you will be attacked. You will be attacked. You will be attacked. And so what happened? Here's a woman that wanted something, and he rebuffed her, and she made up a lie. She told her husband, "This guy tried to rape me," and he took off running, and I grabbed his coat as evidence of what he did. And so what happens to him? Here's this young man. God gave him this dream. He's in prison for something he didn't do. And it's not fair, and it's not right. And he's all here because of these stupid brothers. So what happens? Genesis 39:21. But the Lord. Yes. Don't you love that? Don't you love those three words? But the Lord. But the Lord. This was happening. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. Are you seeing a pattern here? Whatever responsibility he has goes very well. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. God was developing a skill in Joseph. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Second verse, same as the first, a little bit louder and a little bit worse. It just kept happening in Joseph's life. And so as he's there in the prison, this is Pharaoh's prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker get thrown into prison. Pharaoh was ticked at him, go to prison. He didn't like the oatmeal for breakfast or something one day, and he just throws him in prison. And so one day, as Joseph was taking care of him, he noticed they were really downcast. Well, what's going on? And he was talking to them about what's going on in their life, and he said, well, we've both had dreams, and we have no idea what they mean. And so, verse 8 of Genesis 40. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." And so Joseph accurately interpreted their dreams, and one of them was going to die in a few days, and the other one was going to go back to his position. And the chief cupbearer was going to go back to his position, and so Joseph said, "Okay, when you go back, tell Pharaoh about me. Tell him I'm not here because I've done anything wrong." And he told him his whole story. Tell Pharaoh. Okay, I will. All right? Have you ever depended on somebody else to come through for you? Genesis 40, verse 23. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Well, if you depend on other people, there will be times that they will let you down. He forgot. And you'd think, well, man, for how long? Next chapter, 41, verse 1. 2 full years later. I'm sorry, that's got to be a typo. 2 empty years later. Can you imagine the emptiness of a prison cell when you don't belong there? 2 years. Have you ever waited 2 years for something? So you understand how long it is. We're just going to stay here for 2 years. Go. If I did 2 minutes, you would walk out. And he hung in there for 2 years. And let's finish the rest of that verse. Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. Recognize waiting is one of God's favorite tools. God likes to make you wait. Why? Is he evil? And we know the answer is no. There is a purpose when God makes us wait. If I told you, I have something great for you, wait right here and I'll be back. I could be able to accurately gauge how much you trusted me by how long you waited before you left. Some of you would wait 15 minutes. Not many would wait 24 hours. Pastor said, wait right here. I'm just going to wait right here. But he hasn't come back yet. I'm just going to wait. And the better you know me, and the more you trust me, the longer you will wait. And God is testing us, and he tests us over and over and over again by making us wait. I don't like it. But it's good for us. And it builds our dependence on God. Joseph, from the time he was sold into slavery, waited 13 years. Abraham waited 25 years. After God had told him, you're going to have a son, he waited 25 years. Moses waited 40 years. Jesus waited 30 years. If God is causing you to wait, you're in good company. Waiting is one of God's favorite tools. And so Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream with God's help. And the dream is about a famine that's going to come in 7 years. And he said there's going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. And so Joseph says, hey, we got to make preparations for this. Genesis 41, verse 37. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man? So, what? Pharaoh has known him how long? 15 minutes. So obviously filled with the Spirit of God. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Oh, are you kidding me? That's awesome. Realize your setback was actually God setting the stage. Your setback was God setting the stage. Imagine the staff meeting in heaven. And God says, now, listen, we've got to brainstorm this one. I've got to get Joseph to Egypt, and Pharaoh has to put him in charge of all of Egypt. How can we do that? Oh, well, maybe, and they're throwing out ideas. Maybe we could have him meet some traders, and then he would go to Egypt, but how would he? No, that won't work. And we could have Joseph, like Pharaoh could have a contest to find a new assistant. No, he wouldn't have character development in there. It's got to be a slow process so I can build up Joseph in the process. And then somebody comes up with this thing that we just read. And he goes, he's falsely accused. He's sold into slavery. All this happens. Yeah, that'll do, God said. That'll do. All along, you could have talked to Joseph the day before that, and there's no way he'd say, well, I'm just enjoying this. He has no idea what God was going to do. He remembered the dream, but he didn't know how God was going to bring it to fruition. But God had a plan. God was in charge. Back to the lodgepole pines and that pine cone. As we think back to Yellowstone, there were a few areas where the lodgepole pines have struggled to return. You know why? Human fire management techniques. In 1953, there was an area where there was a fire, and they used bulldozers to go through the area and plow through the ground to stop the fire. And all the way around that, the forest has recovered. But where we, in our human brilliance, tried to fix it, it made it worse. There's a tendency for us to, when we're in the middle of the waiting season, to figure out our shortcut. Abraham waited for 25 years for a child. And Sarah had an idea. Hey, listen, I have this servant Hagar. She's mine. So if I give her to you and she has a child, it's my child basically. So go sleep with Hagar and then have a child through her. And Ishmael was born. The Arab race has descended from Ishmael. Arabs and the Jews, has there been problems ever since? Yeah, constantly. Why? That was somebody else's shortcut. And there's a tendency for us to do that. In the middle of the wait is to give up. But I want to encourage you to hold and stay where God has placed you. And so, we're going to play a video in a second. And during that video, I just want you to be in prayer and saying, God, what are you saying to me? And spend this 3 to 4 minutes in prayer, talking to God and asking God to speak to you in your situation. Would you stand with me? With your heads bowed and your eyes closed. We've been talking about waiting. And somebody else is waiting too. God is waiting for you to surrender control of your life to Him. You've been following God, but you've been trying to do things your own way. And it's leading to more of a mess. And so this morning, I'm challenging you to simply say to God, I surrender. I surrender all my life to you. Everything in my life is yours. I surrender. And then tell God, I commit to obeying you, whatever the situation. I will obey you. That is my commitment. And then ask God, teach me to follow you. Teach me to follow you. And if you did that this morning, I want to be praying for you this week and the weeks to come. And just circle the C on the bottom of your connection card and put your name on that. And I'll be praying for you. Father, thank you. Thank you that you are in control when things are crazy, when our life is in a forest fire. You're still in control. And you always say this far, but no farther. And though it hurts, and though it may be lonely and difficult and frustrating and people don't understand, we will follow. We will obey. And we will give you honor and glory and praise. Thank you for what you're going to do in us. How you're going to renovate our lives so that through us you can renovate the lives of the people around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.